Hello, I'm Joan. I'm a Canadian family physician who also works as a restorative medical educator, facilitator, and coach. I create spaces that rehumanize the work of healthcare. I'm creating this podcast to remind myself, as well as anyone else working in a helping profession, that when you are working and caring for your human patients, you are the other human in the room. Hey there, healthcare humans. Before we dive into this week's episode, I wanted to give you a quick reminder that Creating Space, my new coaching program and retreat, is going to be starting October 7th, 2024. So if you have been listening to the podcast for a while and really already making some changes in your life that help you rehumanize healthcare, and you're ready for the next step, you're ready to be a part of a community of healthcare humans who are asking these same innovative, system changing questions of what happens if I find a way for my version of healthcare to be human for me? How does that change the system as a whole? How can it feel better for my own life? And you want to spend most Monday afternoons with me for the next 6 months, as well as a fabulous 3-night retreat in April where we sink in even deeper and get to be in real-time community with each other. I would love for you to join me. There's a really amazing group of healthcare humans who have already signed up, but there is space for you. We're waiting for you. So what are you waiting for? So in this podcast, the show notes below, you'll be able to find the link, or you can just go to joanchanmd.com/space, book your call with me. We can make sure it's the right time for you, good fit for you. And let's get going. We're waiting for you to join us in Creating Space. And I'm so excited for you to book your call and see you there. Now on with the episode. Hello there, healthcare humans. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of The Other Human in the Room. So I am technically still on summer vacation. I'm in my third of 3 weeks off in a row. And I am planning on probably next week doing some deeper reflection and sharing some of my overall lessons and takeaways from my time away from medicine like I did last year. But I just as a part of my open spacious week, this is one of 2 of these 3 weeks where I am the only one off in my house. Everyone else is at daycare, camp, working. And so I'm just having a free exploration day. And I stumbled upon this term and this sort of label or identity, a way of describing yourself. And that's kind of opened up something in my brain. And I know myself well enough that I knew I at least wanted to record a podcast someday about it. You guys should see the number of Google Docs I have for podcast ideas. I label them on a certain way, and some of them are pretty detailed. Some of them literally just have one sentence of that idea, and I can always go back and choose from them if I need to. But this one, I was like, well, I have some time and space in this very spacious day, and I'm feeling like doing a more off the cuff podcast about it and getting it recorded. So that's what happens when you create enough space for whatever the heck it is you want to do. Sometimes spontaneous creativity happens. And that's interesting, just FYI, but also is very related to the actual topic of this podcast. So I was today years old when I learned the term multi-potential. Oh no, multi-potential. No, that's how do you say it? Oh yeah, multi-potentialite. Potentialite. I just realized that I spelled it wrong in the title, and so that's what threw me off. Multipotentialite. Multipotentialite. I'm going to say it a few times to get it helpful in my mouth. I learned it from this other thing that I was listening to, and immediately was like, what is that term? What does that mean? Why do I recognize myself even in that sort of obscure term that's not immediately clear what it is? I should say, just in general, I think labels and types are an interesting idea to play with. I'm like a personality type person. I know that I'm an Enneagram 6 with a 1 wing. I know that I am Myers-Briggs INFJ, for example. And I've seen in those specific sort of communities or ideas of thought how sometimes you can use a label to like fence yourself in versus set yourself free, if you will, and so and certainly in healthcare I see lots of times where like a specific label can really stigmatize or limit or bias a person's own perception of themselves, and certainly especially certain stigmatized labels like borderline personality disorder is just a classic one, can really shift how people in healthcare and people in general society view a specific person for sure. So I'm not like pro label, and I'm also not against label. Like it depends how you're using them. Certainly, um, if you try on, I like thinking of it as like clothes or like a hat or something. So it's like you try it on, and if it helps you feel kind of more cozy, more comfy, more free to be yourself within that thing you've put on, versus if it's like a corset that's constraining you. If it's a corset that's constraining you, get it out of there. But if it's something where you're like, now that I have this on my body, I actually feel like it's an extension or expression of myself that makes it easier for me to explain myself to others and explain myself to myself. I enjoy those sorts of labels, and always with like an open hand, nothing firm where it's like, well, that couldn't be true about me because I've always identified myself as a blah, 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 So that's just like a preamble about labels in general. This one in particular was quite interesting to me. And so I went on a little Google search of like what the heck it's about. And so what I found is this TED talk by the person that appears to be like the person that popularized the term. Their name is Emily Wapnick, and I apologize if I am mispronouncing that. I heard them say it once at the beginning of the TED Talk, I think. And they use they, them pronouns, which is why I'm saying they, them. And their website is puttylike.com, which is kind of neat. So it's like, if you're putty like, if you are moldable, I am assuming. And their TED Talk, it's from 2015. So maybe everyone listening already knew this term existed, but I did not. And the term and their TED Talk and describing kind of what a multi-potentialite could look like was very resonant. And so I thought, people who listen to this podcast listen because they resonate with some part of me. So in case this helps you identify yourself, if you so wish, as a multi-potentialite, or even just someone in your life as a multi-potentialite, so you understand them in a different way, I just thought it was really neat. So I'm just going to actually read the official definition from Emily's website. A multi-potentialite is someone with many interests and creative pursuits. It stems from the word multipotentiality, which is a psychological and educational term used to describe people who display aptitudes across multiple disciplines. The name of the TED Talk is like why some of us don't have one true calling. And the way that Emily frames the whole talk is like asking the audience, like, how often and how young were you when you first heard someone ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? And talking about how in many aspects of our society and culture, it's like, what's your one job, and that's your one identity, and that's your one calling, and that's it. And how if you really are more of a multi-potentialite that has many passions and interests, this can feel very constraining and can even make you feel like you can have shame stories around there must be something wrong with me because I can't find my one thing that I'm supposed to be in love with for the rest of my life, And I just deeply related to that, just to say. Especially Emily described a pattern that they noticed where they would get really deeply excited and obsessed with a certain area of learning, and they would dive really deep into it, and they would learn everything about it, and at a certain point they would get kind of bored with it, and then they would want to move on to something else. And that's something that I can really relate to, in a way where I think there was a time where I wouldn't even let myself really get that excited about learning anything because I had chosen medicine, and medicine was the one thing. And also, there's so many inhuman stories about knowledge and what you're supposed to learn in medicine that for a long time I just like actually found it hard to learn anything new at all because it all felt very high pressure. It all felt really like I already should know it all. And so then my learning brain, in terms of like learning around work, was very muted for a long time. And it's been interesting. The more I've let go the pressure, first of all, to learn only about medicine. Like I would say my love for learning about medicine and healthcare is coming back. And that's very delightful to experience because I do love learning in general. But for me, before I could re-love learning about medicine, I had to give myself permission to just really get obsessed and learn about other things. And so for me, it sort of started in self-help, different kinds of self-help therapy, personal development, whatever words you want to use, like realms. And it would be like I'd get really obsessed with like one podcast or one methodology, or I got really into Byron Katie for a while, just as a random example. And then the coaching thing, that was like sort of another phase of it. And then which coach's methodology? I'd listen to this coach's podcast and like take their course. And then I would listen to that one. And then I would have this sense of like, oh, like, why can't I just land on the final one, you know? And even before I started being excited about learning, certainly like within healthcare, you know, I knew very early on I didn't want to specialize in everything. And so I was going to be quote unquote just a generalist. Because I couldn't imagine only talking about one system of the body for the rest of my life and seeing one kind of set of issues, which I think it's like, is everyone who's in family medicine a multi-potentialite? Like, probably. I think actually a lot of people in healthcare in general are probably multi-potentialites, but may have had to cut themselves off from that, pursuing other passions, because it's not, there's certain corners in certain ways it's encouraged, but not that encouraged to like pursue lots of different interests. It's, you know, it's supposed to be, you made this investment of your time and societal time to train you, and so you better just keep doing that one thing and being that one cog in the machine forever. Keep churning out those appendectomies, keep churning out those cough and cold consults, because that's what we trained you for, you know. But I knew that I definitely didn't want to. I wanted to limit myself as little as possible, which is why, and I also didn't like hospitals. That's another reason. But those are the reasons that I really felt the deepest affinity for family medicine and a more generalist practice. So even within family medicine, you can specialize. And I did not want to do that. That was not for me. So that's really interesting to think of. And even then, once I had my practice, and so it was somewhat more stable in like, here's my practice, I'm married to these patients for what I hope to be the rest of my career. Quickly, like my eye was wandering, if you will. And I tried out a bunch of different things. I tried out like retirement home, house doctor, which had some wonderful parts and then a lot of not wonderful parts. Teaching, which continues to be a thing that I want to explore and do different versions of, though, you know. Then lots of different leadership things, different kinds of committees and projects. And I would reach a point with a project or on a committee where I would feel this like sort of, I've gotten what I needed out of it, started to feel bored, started to feel resentful of it. And I did have a sense of like, gosh, what's wrong with me? Am I just like selfish, or am I too easy? I'm not committed enough. I'm not loyal enough or something. But it's so interesting, you know, if you choose to subscribe to this notion that there are folks that are multi-potentialites and other folks that the other word that Emily uses is a specialist. So you can be a specialist or you can be a multi-potentialite. And I'm sure that I've just literally discovered them, but I imagine at some point they would say there's a spectrum, blah, blah, blah. But just to use as two sort of contrasting examples, you know, I think it's just neat to know that there's a whole way of approaching life, learning, what you do in terms of what you offer to the world that really could be supported and affirmed. That's not the specialist model, because it feels like, certainly in healthcare, it's like, what's your role? What's your job? Stay within it. When you are trying to do multiple different things, even just within healthcare, there's a certain amount that's like celebrated, but often still with like a sneaky neg, like, wow, I don't know how you have time for all of those things. And like, which maybe folks who talk that way are actually secretly a bit envious and wish they could do all those things, or they think now that makes them less than, which is like the thing I like is that neither of these are less than. Like specialists are super important and multi-potentialites are super important. And actually they can work really well in partnership with each other, and that's like healthy, you know? So yeah, I just think that's really interesting. And just as you can hear, I'm doing like a real-time reflection on this idea, which I do a lot with different ideas I come across, whether it's like on social media, in a podcast, in a book, in conversation, where I'll learn about a new idea, a new concept, a new way of looking at the world, and I'll immediately be like, oh my gosh, how does this apply to my life? And how does this apply to the spaces in which I inhabit, most importantly, healthcare? And the thing that's interesting about how I do that is that that's literally a quality of a multi-potentialite. So that's nice to know. Like they said, where did they say? Oh yeah, so they talk in the TED Talk, they talk about these superpowers, and actually it looks like here on their website they have like a slightly larger list. So like here I'm going to read this whole section. This seems relevant. So like multi-potentialite challenges and superpowers. So the way multi-potentialites think, learn, and create sometimes clashes with specialist norms, right? Because often in lots of ways the world is set up for people to be unidimensional, uni-identity in like many ways, right? And they can clash with those norms. Like just as a very brief aside, I mean, I relate to that even as someone who is multiracial. Like you're supposed to fit in one box, period. And I would argue that no human fits in only one box, actually. So there's always a way in which that's inhuman and harmful, right? But even within that, like there's a human way of having someone's brain can be wired for specialization where, you know, they have one sort of true passion and it's their focus and they love it and they want to devote their whole life to it. I can absolutely imagine that exists. And I can imagine that there's a lot more people trying to make that work for them that really have at least 2 or 3 passions. Like maybe not this thing where they're constantly going from one thing to the next, but people in general contain multitudes. So there's something to be gained even from learning what helps multi-potentialites thrive for anyone, even if you're sort of, I feel like I'm a general specialist or something, right? And I just made that term up. I don't know. Anyway, it's probably somewhere on the spectrum, right? So what does it say here? Multi-potentialites often struggle with finding work that provides both enough variety and stability. Hello. I do think then I feel lucky and grateful to my past self. Like, I just think that family medicine is such a good fit for me. And I have learned it's not my only fit. Like, that's a whole other level, right? So I think once you're in medicine, at least when you're a doctor, but maybe so let me know if you are not a doctor, you hold another role in healthcare, if you feel like this applies to you. Like once you've done all that training and all that work and all that dehumanization to finally hold that very special identity of, you know, nurse practitioner, midwife, doctor, physiotherapist, like whatever it is, that it's like, oh, so you're not going to go do something else, right? Definitely as a doctor, now being also a podcaster, a teacher, a coach, a facilitator, like there was a sense of like, why are you going to do all that? You're already doing this one thing, you know? And so, yeah, that's interesting that that's a whole other layer in which that clashes with specialist norms where you're supposed to only have like one source of income and identity. And I would relate to the fact that, you know, as you're setting that up, it's not like there's a standard way that someone can be like, I'd like to do 3 things at once, you know, 1 on Monday, 2 on Thursday. Like I personally have experienced having to do a lot of creative iteration to find sort of stable ways to, for example, make money, like finding work, like different sources of income. That's been an interesting process to go through, but it's not a cookie cutter process of like, how can I make a certain amount of money and support this project as well as myself in this domain versus this domain and have it not balance because it's not a singular balance, but have it flow. So I can relate to that being a challenge. Another thing that multi-potentialites often struggle with are productivity and focus issues, like balancing the need to explore with the need to make progress on multiple projects. That's interesting. I think at times that's been true for me. And I'm grateful that I at least now feel like I have a good flow, including like, so one thing that really helps me is to really book in and block out space for exploring. Like I'm in the third week of 3 weeks completely off from clinical work, almost completely off from teaching work, no coaching at the moment all summer. So like I've sort of created space, and I'm all into creating space these days, but creating space to allow myself the avenue to do just pure exploration, pure pleasure, pure creativity for those sakes, has really does help, so that when then I'm in my work setting, I can make that progress. When I'm doing podcasting, I can make that progress, because I think I can relate to, and I wonder, I'm really just discovering this in real time. It's funny to record a podcast. I don't know if they, or just in general, multi-potentialites would agree. But I think probably a common problem is jamming it all in and being like, I need to do all of these things all at once, and leaving no space for creativity. But that's got to be one of the essential ways that you, at least for me, it is the essential way that I allow all the different aspects to flourish. I love thinking of a garden analogy in like so many ways for so many things, and certainly for my life. Like if I tried to plant too many plants too close together, they all would actually suck up the nutrients in a way where none of them would thrive, and a bunch of them might die, and it like would be overgrown, versus like leaving space between each plant allows them to all bloom and thrive. That analogy just came to me. That's a good one. I got to repeat that one. That's good for the creating space stuff. This is a multi-potentialite's brain working in real time, folks. Okay, and then the third challenge is challenges with mental health and confidence, such as imposter syndrome, answering the question, so what do you do? And dealing with family and friends who don't understand. Yeah, it took me a long time to tell certain corners of my life that I even had a podcast, and that's like for multiple reasons. But even now, like if there was and I meet a new person, I often just try not to have the what you do conversation, because, and maybe you can relate, like saying you work in healthcare almost immediately leads to super personal questions about their healthcare or other people's healthcare, where suddenly you're like, they now want you to offer medical advice for free. And so, I already have a slight complex about bringing that up, and the times where I've been in conversation. And so if in any case, like I often now will almost like skip over that. So I remember having a recent conversation with like a mom of a kid who's in like the same class as my kid, and they talked about, I think, coaching or something, and I was like, oh my gosh, I do some work as a coach. I also am a family physician, but I actually also do coaching for her. So it's been a way to connect. That's like, it can just slide in the medicine part. It doesn't have to be the main deal. Anyway, but I understand. I can totally understand, especially the imposter syndrome thing of like, I don't know, I do 10 things. What do you want me to say? Like, I'm all of these things. I am, I contain multitudes. Like, it's not just this one job. And especially when people are like, that's not stable, that's not financially viable. Even though there's so many examples of that not being true, I can see that being a challenge as well. And so I love the way that this is phrased. Emily's written it. These challenges don't exist because multi-potentialites are broken. They aren't a result of failure. Instead, these difficulties arise from a lack of resources, a widespread misunderstanding of multi-potentialites' needs, and a devaluing of their unique strengths. That I'm definitely going to read Emily's book. I'm going to get into this more. So I may have a follow-up where I'm like, now I actually understand multi-potentialites versus my initial impressions. But because I'm like, ooh, lack of resources. I think that one, it's like, so I sort of had that garden analogy with the planting of the flowers, and then like resourcing. I think about that a lot. Do I have enough resourcing, like, financial resources for sure, and also like human resources? So the more that I've experimented with having folks on my immediate team and finding more meaningful and authentic ways of collaborating with them so that they can be super helpful to me and I to them, I was just reflecting earlier today how resourced I feel in terms of support. Like right now I am away from my clinic, and I feel so resourced that my wonderful nurse practitioner, Amy, who you met on the podcast recently, is seeing my patients, and our relationship continues to grow. And that means because I have support there, that I don't have to be constantly there and be sort of chained to only that role, you know? And so I can see that being a big piece. And then I'm curious what they will say, like, multi-potentialites needs are, and is space one of them? That's my hypothesis. I will let you know later. I imagine it's not going to be on this like about website. Okay, but then they talk about the strengths, and that's, I really wanted to make sure I highlighted these two because I think it's so true, especially in this complex time. So what it says here is, when multi-potentialites are supported and encouraged to embrace their diverse skills and experiences, they're able to tap into their superpowers. So when they're supported and encouraged to embrace their diverse skills and experiences, they're able to tap into their superpowers. And they've listed 5. The first is idea synthesis. And they went into this in more detail in the TED Talk. And that, like, you are hearing me do this right now. The idea synthesis is something that I have really discovered as a superpower of mine, and might be like, reflect on if you think it, if you gave yourself space, would it be one of yours? And I would imagine for some of you it's yes. Some of you who are past or current coaching clients, for sure it's yes. Like, what they mean by idea synthesis is taking concepts, learnings, experiences from different domains and like cross-pollinating them. And that's how innovation happens. So literally right now, I'm taking this idea, which is from sort of general, it sounds like kind of business culture, personality. I don't know where Emily would put their domain. It looks like they often support people to create businesses that allow them to be multi-potentialites, so like career world, and applying it specifically to healthcare. And I have never heard this term before, so it's clearly not in the like regular lexicon of healthcare, even though, like, what if we started calling generalists multi-potentialites? Would that take the just sting out of it? Oh, I'm just a multi-potentialite. You can't say just and then multi-potentialite. It's too fancy. It's too like expansive, you know? And it would not turn into where we're now, we would say just specialist, though. We'd have to make both those roles equally fabulous and valued, because there's no othering. They're celebrating the diversity here. Thank you very much. So just this idea of idea synthesis is literally what this podcast is. And so check. Glad to know that that superpower has a name. And it's my favorite thing. Like, before I had a podcast, I would just think of these ideas. I'd listen to podcasts or read books and just think of all these ideas. There's like journals I have of like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. I like tried to start a blog and a Tumblr at one point. Like, this has been how my brain works for a very long time. And so it's neat that I'm not the only one, I guess. It's got a term. The second superpower that they talk about is rapid learning. And I think that's really interesting and holds true. My most recent example I can give of like getting deeply obsessed and just having like an almost insatiable, for a while insatiable, and now I'm starting to get almost satiated, which is nice, but an appetite for like learning about something would be my Taylor Swift thing. Truly. I'm not satiated, like I'm bored of her yet, but I'm feeling like I have space in my heart and my brain to explore other things. Maybe my next thing is going to be multi-potentialites. I don't know. And so the skill of that, like, I can learn things quite rapidly. And like I said at the top of this podcast, I feel like that skill was really dulled for a long time, sadly, while I was trying to learn medicine, because it felt like there was too much pressure. It felt like everything, you were immediately going to be pimped on it. And so that makes you way less likely to remember it. Dear all medical educators, that can't be only multi-potentialite brains, but at least for the multi-potentialite brains, like, it's interesting to think of, like, say there were different kinds of curriculums that were designed for different kinds of brains. So like the specialist brain would want to dive deep on one topic. No, I guess multi-potentialite would too. It's like, get really obsessed with the kidney for a while and then move on, but like leave space for more cross-pollinating. I will say that my education was more that, like, I appreciated the ways that it did try and scaffold that in. But I think I just was so caught up in the inhuman stories of like, I need to be perfect. I can't make a mistake. I'm already behind if I don't know everything, which is just, I'm already behind if I don't know everything is probably the worst inhuman story to have living in your head. if you're trying to learn a whole field of knowledge, like in medicine. It leads to a lot of despair and distraction. So it's been a real joy. One of the true joys of the past few years has been re-engaging with my ability to rapidly learn, and including things that are not going to ever earn me money, like Taylor Swift or pop culture, but that just like feels so good. My brain just loves it. And can you relate? That's my question to you, listener. The third superpower is adaptability, and that just makes so much sense, right? So if someone feels like super like rigid, things always have to be the way they are, I can see that not really being the multi-potentialite box, of the sense of like, yeah, of course things change. Yeah, my interests change. Everything changes. Life has changed, and that being a skill that's really important. I see the many places in healthcare where we do not have a culture of adaptability. Things are very rigid. The form has to be the same every time. They will fax back that form if you use the wrong form. Like, so much rigidity. And there's a certain amount of structure. Like, you need a backbone in your body, otherwise you're mush. Like, you need a certain amount of flexible structure. And the amount of rigidity, the amount of this is the way that things have always been, we see the suffering that is already being created by that. And so what if we had more visibly acknowledged, celebrated roles of multi-potentialite thriving, and that a culture that more supports that? Like, imagine what could be different in healthcare. And healthcare is kind of important, guys. So I mean, like, what if, right? The fourth superpower is big picture thinking. And I think I just gave an example of that in real time again. I'm literally always like, how could this make the entire system better? And it's just so fun to think big picture. I don't know what to tell you. But then my thing, it's like the emergent strategy thing. I love thinking big picture and then zooming it down of like, and then that, if that big picture is what I wish was true, what does that mean for like what I order for lunch, or like what I do with my afternoon, or like with my next decision I make in regards to clinical medicine, like then applying it extremely micro small picture. That's my favorite dynamic. And then the last superpower they talk about is relating to and translating between different types of people, quote unquote, languages and modes of thought. Hello, it's nice to meet you. I consider myself like a bridge person, and I think it's, am multiracial, and that's a piece of it. I am quite confident, and also just like having been very deeply entrenched in one body of thought, you could say, which was my evangelical Christian upbringing, and then very not being in that anymore, and doing a lot of thinking and deep questioning and listening to podcasts and like interacting with like philosophers and theologians who talk about multiplicity and bridge building that way. And that has made my brain do something where I can hold many ideas at the same time. And then now in this space, that's I think that's one of like I love doing interviews with people in healthcare to get their personal experiences. And I also, equally in a completely different way, love interviewing and having conversations with people who have nothing to do with healthcare on the surface, and then finding so many new, exciting, rich ideas for healthcare, And also, I end up bridging the other way. Like, it's been so interesting to form partnerships and friendships with people. Well, I think like people in my life now, collaborators, friends who historically, because of their lived experiences, haven't always trusted healthcare, and now feel fiercely, look at how healthcare, like, oh, actually doctors are humans. And I had forgotten that, understandably, because maybe they've been harmed or negatively impacted in some way by the actions of doctors. Like, it makes sense. But now, like, rehumanizing people in healthcare for people not in healthcare too. And so like it's that translation, that bridge piece. And I really feel that strongly. So in summation, I definitely am a multi-potentialite, whatever it ends up being. And okay, this last bit seems important to say. The ability to draw from and integrate a range of diverse ideas makes multi-potentialites particularly well suited to solving complex multifactorial problems. And we have a couple of those these days, don't we? And their unconventional backgrounds help them develop unique voices and contribute fresh perspectives wherever they go. That's it. And I think I think also, but it's more already celebrated, like a specialist unique voice is already very much celebrated. Like, ooh, you're the specialist, you're the content expert, you have this specific role. So it would be so cool if then we also started to highlight, like, oh, you're a multi-potentialite, and so you're going to have this specific role. And imagine that we had a culture where like both were equally valued, and even something that people sort of self-identify at the start of a project or when you're in discussion and collaboration with each other. And so it's like, as the multi-potentialite, I'm seeing the big picture here. And then the specialist is like, as the specialist, like, I know the 50 different ways this can go for this one aspect. And so I can let you know what was probably going to work best for my aspect. Like, you can see why those two are both so equally important, and for there not to be all of one or all of the other, really. I just think this is fascinating. So I had never heard of multi-potentialite, which is why I wanted to share it with you. Oh yeah, the last thing is, so if that term is like a mouthful and like me, or I now feel confident at the end of this podcast, but I mispronounced it at the start. So if you want another term, Emily in the TED Talk made the joke of like, everyone in this community can't even agree on what we all call each other. And that feels very apropos for like the description of a multi-potentialite. And I thought that was a funny joke. You should also just go watch their TED Talk. It's like 12 minutes long. And if you tear up by the end, like me, then maybe you're a multi-potentialite. So the other terms, one is polymath, which I have also heard of, but I don't know anything else other than that's a word that exists. But apparently that could also be something you try on as a hat of an identity, polymath. I've definitely heard the term, well, like the classical term is Renaissance man, which they've listed here, and also Renaissance person, which is much more inclusive. And they'd mentioned in the TED Talk how during the Renaissance, if anything, maybe specialists felt a lot of shame and isolation, but because like to be well versed in multiple disciplines was actually really revered and encouraged. And so it's funny that, pendulums swing in all these different directions. And then scanner is another term coined by Barbara Scher. I have never heard of that or of Barbara before, but scanner is kind of a neat, I guess you're scanning all around. I have no idea. Another term they have listed here is generalist. So that's definitely the term that we would know in healthcare best, I would say. And as I said at the top, can really have a bit of a lower in the hierarchy than specialist quality, which is very unfortunate. And if anyone here listening considers themselves a specialist, I would invite you to really explore any unconscious beliefs you may have and how you approach or treat generalists. Though I imagine the people listening to my podcast are the ones that are already treating everyone quite lovely, because I, as a generalist, have experienced a real talking down to from specialists. And I'm sure specialists have experienced not great things for generalists too. So it is certainly not unidirectional. Certain Facebook groups I'm a part of, they talk about all the different directions that can be true. But definitely generalist. By the general population, like the number of times it's like, oh, you're just a GP. It's like, yep, that's me. But now I can reclaim it with pride. A generalist, a multi-potentialite. And then the last two terms is multi-hyphenate. I have heard that. Though again, that one's like, oh, you're fancy. Like, it's not about being fancy. It's not now being better than other people, And multi-passionate. I like multi-passionate as well. I'm really into multi-potentialite just because it is such a mouthful. So it's like a great like diction exercise, like a tongue twister every time I say it. And I'm very proud how I'm kind of nailing it now. But I would say of those generalist, I already considered myself, and multi-passionate, I think one thing about it is, and what I would encourage everyone to explore is not necessarily only if you're a multi-potentialite or multi-passionate in ways where you're going to earn income from all of your passions, though it's kind of nifty, as I've discovered, to find a way to earn some income because it allows you to be resourced in a different way versus being someone who like hates their job, but it earns a paycheck, but then barely has time for all the hobbies they actually enjoy. But also, I mean, like, I'm never going to make money off of Taylor Swift fandom, and that's fine. I'm good with that. I give money to other people in the Taylor Swift fandom who I like that they've done that for themselves. And so I like multi-passionate, just like, what are you passionate about in general? Some of that will bring the resource of money into your life, but some of that will bring in the resource of energy, of connection, of meaning, of purpose, and that may or may not be tied to money, right? I just think that's really cool. So there you go. At the end of this, and I'm definitely going to label like the title of this podcast is going to be, are you a multi-potentialite? And I can say with clear conviction, I haven't even taken the quiz on this website that now means I'm on their email list, but like I will be very shocked if they say, no, I'm not a multi-potentialite at the end of that quiz. And I'm curious if, just based on this slightly rambly description, if you're feeling like you relate as well. Let me know if you are. Is my listenership more the multi-potentialite type than the specialist type, or do we have a mix here? I think I would be curious to know. So yeah, if you have listened, or if you take the quiz or whatever you like, let me know either way. I'd love to know the podcast audience makeup. You can, DM me on Instagram, or just like use the contact form on my website. I would love to know. Anyways, I'm now going to go do some other passion. Actually, I'm probably going to play the piano and sing some Taylor Swift songs, actually, before I'm going to leave and have lunch with someone. And that's what my day is all about here on my summer sabbatical. And the last thing, little, you could say plug, little invitation. If as you listen to all this and you recognize, gosh, I think I could be multi-potentialite, or I do wish I had more space to even discover if I have multiple passions. I just feel like I have no passions for anything right now because I'm drowning in the lack of space in my life. As of when I'm recording this, which is in mid-August of 2024, I think there's like 3 to 5, depending on how many people want to come. But I do have around 3 to 5 spots left in Creating Space, which is the coaching course and program with a retreat at the end that I'm very excited to offer coming this fall. And there's lots of time. So, I mean, I'll probably put this out by the end of August. So please, even if you're not sure, but if you're like wondering if it's a good fit for you, I have created space in my calendar to have multiple conversations with multiple people. If you are just have an inkling, a curiosity, might this be a place where you could explore things like whether you are, oh no, I already forget the term now, multi-potentialite. If creating space in your life, like I said, with the gardening analogy, if that really rang true to you, we can be helping you pull up some plants and, really planning out your garden of your life and this year, and seeing what that allows to thrive and grow in your life. So I'll make sure I have a link in the podcast, or you could just go to my website and book that call and see if it's a good fit for you. Okay. All right, everybody. Thanks so much as always for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. I would love to take this work deeper with you. Visit joanchanmd.com today and discover my growing menu of options for restorative medical education to suit your learning needs. I offer one-on-one coaching, customized workshops, and self-study courses that allow you to connect not only with my work on a deeper level, but also with other healthcare humans just like you. So if you want to start humanizing your work in healthcare to a deeper level and do it in community with others, please visit joanchanmd.com and find those options and what fits you and your life today.